Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to look at a creepy call that ended in murder. In 2013, a man named Michael Petrie was traveling through Arizona. He decided to stay at a motel in Kingman, Arizona. That night, he was woken up in the middle of the night by a phone call. He picked up the phone, and on the other end was a woman. She said she was calling from the front desk of the motel and told him that he had to check out right now. He asked her why, and she just repeated that he had to leave immediately. It wasn't rude or anything, so he just hung up the phone and went back to sleep. He was a bit creeped out, but he figured it was probably a prank call or something. But about 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. He picked up, and the same woman told him to check out. Now again, he asked why, but she just kept repeating herself. He could hear what sounded like commotion in the background, muffled yelling and people talking loudly. This time, though, the tone of the voice had changed. It now sounded a lot more sinister. Michael could practically feel the rage emanating from the other end of the line. This time, he got up out of bed. He was still half asleep, and not really understanding what was going on. He grabbed his bags and left the room. All this time, he could hear the woman yelling at him to hurry up and get out of there. He made it to his car and drove off without even bothering to find out what was going on. The next day, Michael went on with his life. He drove to Las Vegas, where he was supposed to meet some friends. When the police in Kingman, Arizona got the call about the incident, they did their best to track down Michael. They wanted to ask him a few questions. And while he had given them his name and a description of his car, they couldn't find him anywhere. It was until 3 days later, when he was stopped for speeding in Las Vegas, that the police were finally able to question him. They asked him about the call from the motel, and he explained everything to them. They let him go, but they still thought that he might have some answers for them. Maybe he had seen something he wasn't thinking about. Maybe he knew something about a crime that had happened in the motel room that he didn't realize. At this point, Michael still had no idea what they were talking about. It wasn't until he turned on the news that he realized how serious this situation really was. On the TV, they were reporting about a brutal murder that had taken place in the same motel room he had been staying in. As it turns out, the woman Michael had spoken to on the phone was the manager of the motel. She had been stabbed to death, along with her boyfriend in their room. It wasn't clear who had done it or why, but the police believed it had something to do with drugs. The police also learned that the two had been expecting a large group of bikers to arrive that very same day. It seems likely that whoever called Michael was trying to warn him of something, but what exactly, they'd never know. And as for Michael, he was just glad he hadn't been there when whoever it was that had murdered the manager and her boyfriend came into his room. Now, we want to know what you think. Do you think it was a creepy coincidence that he got a call telling him to leave just before he was almost murdered? Or do you think that maybe he was almost involved in something bigger than he knew? Let us know your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out more content like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. This terrifying discovery was made by fishermen in Michigan. While out on the lake one night, these fishermen heard what sounded like a woman crying out for help. So they did the only logical thing they could do and set out to find her. But when they got close to where the sound was coming from, their boat almost capsized. And when it did, they all saw a pale figure underneath the water. Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we will be taking a look at this very eerie story about a siren that may or may not live in a lake in Michigan. The story was shared on Reddit by user Beartoes, where he said, "I grew up hearing stories of this from my dad, who was a fisherman." He begins the story saying that there were 3 fishermen who were out on the lake at night. It was the middle of winter, so the lake was completely frozen over with only a few small holes in the ice for the fishermen to drop their lines through. As the men fished, they began to hear what sounded like a woman crying out for help. They couldn't make out exactly what she was saying, but they could hear her clearly. One of the men looked over at his companions and asked if they had heard anything, but they insisted that they must have been hearing things. After all, it was the middle of the night, and there was no one around, so who could it have been? They continued on fishing, though, and the sound began to get closer and closer. It sounded as if the woman was near the shore now. And when the men followed the noise, they noticed that the ice began to part right before their eyes. The water churned, and the ice even lifted up a bit, revealing a small opening. That's when they knew they had to go after her, because she could have fallen into the hole and needed help. Beartoes continues the story saying, "They rowed over and one of them leaned out to try and grab her. She was too quick and pulled away, just as his hand reached her. The force of her movement caused the boat to rock violently and nearly capsize. At this point, they all agreed that they needed to get out of there. But when they tried to row away, the woman began to cry out again, this time more frantically than before. They listened closely and heard her say, "Help me, please help me." But as they listened, they realized that the voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Panicked, they turned the boat around and started rowing as fast as they could towards the shore. But as they moved, they noticed something strange. The woman in the water was moving with them. No matter which direction they went, she was always there, always just out of reach. And then, as if to confirm their worst fears, when the boat tipped from the waves, one of the fishermen saw something underneath the ice. It was a pale figure with long flowing hair. It was too big to be a child, yet it didn't resemble any human the men had ever seen. They didn't stick around to find out what it was, though as they all agreed that whoever or whatever it wasn't friendly. Bertoz concludes the story saying they finally made it back to shore and haven't been back on the lake since. And that was the last time anyone heard the siren's song. Some people in the comments section believed that the story was actually about a mermaid, while others said it sounded more like a siren. Mermaids and sirens are known to lure sailors to their deaths with their enchanting voices. And many believe that if you were to fall into the water with a mermaid, they would drag you down to the depths of the ocean, never to be seen again. Sirens are also said to appear in the form of a human woman and are known to kidnap young men and bring them out into the forest where they are never seen again. What do you think this story is really about? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I personally think it sounds more like a siren than a mermaid. I mean, come on, the hole I pulled away just as his hand reached her kind of sounds like a siren to me. But what do you think? If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories like it, be sure to check out more content. With that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Malls are dead. We've said it before, and we'll say it again. They're just dead. And when they're not dead, they're dying or in the process of dying. This is especially true here in the United States, where online shopping has nearly killed the mall industry. And if malls don't adapt to this ever-changing world, they'll be left behind. This is why a group of friends decided to explore an abandoned mall in New Jersey. There aren't many people visiting this mall anymore, but that hasn't stopped some from paying it a visit. After all, it's not every day you get to explore an abandoned mall, and who knows what secrets these buildings hold. Well, one urban explorer found out the hard way. It was 2014 when a group of friends decided to explore the deserted Garden State Mall in New Jersey. The mall had been closed for over a year and was slated for demolition, which made exploring it quite dangerous. But that didn't stop these guys. It's rumored that this mall was once one of the most visited places in New Jersey. But that was before the nearby Westfield Garden State Plaza opened up and stole all of their customers. With no customers came no money, and with no money came no business. Eventually, the mall was forced to close its doors for good in 2013 after failing to make a profit. Since then, it's just been another sad, sorry excuse for a building collecting dust and waiting to be demolished. But that is exactly what makes this place so interesting for urban explorers. In the past, they were able to find a whole bunch of mannequins throughout the mall, all frozen in unnatural poses. However, in 2014, only a few remained. One of those remaining mannequins was this one. He was standing perfectly still on a second-floor balcony overlooking the main entrance. It was as though he was guarding the mall or something. Now, this guy was already creepy enough, but what happened next was beyond terrifying. As one of the urban explorers walked past the mannequin, he swore the thing moved its head and stared directly at him. He froze in his tracks and turned around slowly to see if the mannequin had actually moved. It hadn't, yet the feeling that somebody or something was watching him was very real. He tried to shake off the feeling and continue on his merry way, but then he noticed something even more disturbing. There was a shirt on the floor near the base of the mannequin, and it looked like it had been ripped right off its hanger. Was this the work of vandals? Maybe. But there was something strange about the shirt itself. It was a missing person shirt. This mannequin was wearing a shirt with a missing person's photo on it. Now, it would be ridiculous to assume that this was just some sick joke played by the mall owners. This was an abandoned mall. There was no one working here. It's not to mention the fact that it would be illegal and plain wrong to put a missing person. report on a mannequin in an abandoned mall. So who put it there and why? These urban explorers never found out because they noped out of there as fast as they could. And while they didn't stick around to find out, others did. A local urban explorer group went back to the mall and discovered that the shirt was gone. They looked everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found. They even checked the missing persons database just in case, but the person on the shirt was still missing. It's safe to say that this mannequin was cursed. I mean, how else do you explain a mannequin moving its head and staring directly at you, especially when it's in an abandoned mall? These days, it's hard to come across a good old-fashioned ghost story. So when you hear one, you gotta hold on to it. That's why you should subscribe to our channel. A boy in Texas heard scratching behind his closet. He recorded it overnight. When he played it back, a voice whispered, "Let me out." Now, there's some sounds that haunt us for the rest of our lives. The first time I heard my father's voice calling me for dinner, the sound of my son's first steps, the laughter of my wife when we first met. But there are also sounds that strike terror into our hearts. The sound of an axe splitting wood, the screech of tires on gravel, the creak of a rocking chair in an empty room. It was one of those sounds that kept 12-year-old Lucas from sleeping at night. Scratching, he could hear it every night coming from inside his closet. He would toss and turn, trying to get some sleep, but the incessant scratching drove him insane. Sometimes it sounded like metal on wood. Other times it was more like flesh on flesh, and then sometimes it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. He told his parents about it, but they just laughed and said it was all in his head. "There's nothing in there," his mom would say, kissing him goodnight. "It's just some old clothes and your shoes. Now go to sleep." But Lucas couldn't, not with that scratching. So he came up with a plan. He would record the sounds and play them back during the day so his parents could hear it too. It took a few days to get enough evidence, but finally he had it. The incessant scratching filled the tape. When he played it back for his parents, they listened intently, their faces pale. Finally, his dad spoke. "I'm going to check it out," he said, opening the closet door and shining a flashlight in the dark recesses. There was nothing in there, except for some clothes and a pair of sneakers. His dad closed the door and shook his head. "It's all in your head, son," he said, although he didn't sound convinced. Lucas wasn't convinced either that it was all in his head, but he had no other choice but to go to sleep without getting to the bottom of the mystery. So he climbed into bed and closed his eyes. He could still hear the scratching, even if it was only in his head. Then suddenly, a voice whispered right in his ear, "Let me out." He jumped out of bed and turned on the light. Of course, there was nothing there. The voice hadn't come from anywhere, or had it? He walked over to his closet and threw open the doors. Inside, hanging on the back of the door, was a small wooden box. It was intricately carved with strange symbols that he didn't recognize. He had never noticed it before. As he stared at the box, the voice whispered again, this time a little louder, "Let me out. Please, let me out." Out. It was coming from inside the box. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the cool wood. Then he felt something move inside. The scratching sound started again, and this time it was frantic. He didn't want to open the box, but he couldn't stop himself. What if it was a demon? What if it was a monster? What if it was some kind of voodoo doll? As soon as he opened the box, a dark cloud shot out and formed a human-like shape. It was dark and shadowy, and its eyes glowed red. The creature let out a deafening roar and lunged at Lucas. He screamed and ran for his life, the closet door slamming shut behind him. The scratching sound stopped abruptly. He heard the creature moving around in the closet, but it didn't come out. It didn't try to get out. Lucas peeked around the corner and saw the wooden box lying on the floor where he had left it. The closet was empty. He cautiously opened the door and walked in. On the back of the door, the box was gone. He told his parents what had happened, but they just shook their heads and smiled. They thought he was still sleep-deprived and imagining things. But Lucas knew what he had seen. That night, he got into bed and pulled the covers over his head. He could hear the scratching again, but now it was closer. It was right outside his bedroom door. Then he heard the voice again, this time right in his ear. "Let me out, let me out, let me out." And then the scratching stopped. Lucas peeked over the edge of the bed and saw the closet door slowly opening. He screamed and buried his face in his pillow. When he finally looked up, the closet door was wide open. But there was no scratching, only silence. The next morning, Lucas woke up to the sound of hammering. His parents were having the closet removed. "We're going to find out what's behind that thing," his dad said. swinging a sledgehammer at the closet, splinters flying everywhere. Whatever is in here won't bother you anymore. But as soon as the closet was gone, the scratching started again. This time it was coming from inside the walls. And then the voice whispered again, "Let me out." Out. Well, maybe it was just an elaborate April Fool's joke gone wrong, or maybe something more sinister. Good morning. I'm here in the very heart of London. Thank you for joining me. As ever, it's breaking news. We start with what is being described in parts of Pennsylvania as a bizarre incident. A woman had to be rescued by firefighters after a suspected gas leak in the early hours of this morning. The woman was woken in her home at around 4:30 a.m. by her smoke alarm blaring. She called 911. Fire crews descended on the property in Upper Darby. Now they found no gas leak, but they did find some interesting things in the basement of that property. They found footprints leading up to a window. It would appear that whoever was responsible for that gas leak, if there was one, wanted this woman out of her home. They may have even intended to harm her. As we know with gas leaks, there's usually a telltale sign, either a hissing sound or you can smell the gas. This woman could not smell anything, and she certainly couldn't hear anything. Now, how did this person get into her home? There was no signs of forced entry. Police are now appealing for anyone who knows anything about this to contact them. This is the kind of story which will develop over the course of the day. If you are just tuning into our channel now, just want to let you know we are available 24/7 on your television screens and of course online. You can watch us anywhere in the world, whether you're on your mobile phone, tablet, or PC. Just go to our website and register. It's completely free. You can also download our app, which is available for both Apple and Android devices. I think what's most important these days is we give you choice. You can connect with us on many platforms. If you want to see behind the scenes what's really going on, you only need to go to our social media pages. You'll find out what's going on, what we get up to when we're not making these videos. I don't know about you, but I like to know what's going on, especially in this kind of story. As I say, it will develop throughout the day. Now, this particular incident happened in the early hours of this morning. This is what we know so far. The woman was alone in the property. She heard, or she saw rather, the smoke alarm was blaring. She called 911. Fire crews arrived, but they couldn't find any gas leak. What they did notice was the basement window had been left open. As I said before, there were footprints leading up to that window. It would appear somebody had entered the property. The woman, obviously distressed, was taken out of the property by firefighters. No gas leak, but the woman clearly terrified. Now, police are appealing for anybody who knows anything about this incident to come forward. The woman's name is not being released for obvious reasons. She does not want to be identified at this particular point. What's most important is that she's okay, that she's safe and well. But the authorities are appealing for anyone who knows anything about this to contact them. Now, as I said, this could be an elaborate April Fool's joke that's gone wrong. Let's hope that's the case. But police are taking this very seriously. And as they should, a woman has had to be rescued from her own home. Has had to be traumatized by what's gone on simply because somebody's opened her window and left a gas canister or something to that effect, leaving footprints in the process. When we know more, you'll know more. Reporting from the very heart of London, there's nothing quite like a good old-fashioned scary story to get you in the mood for Halloween. So let's begin. It was a cold October night in New York City. The wind was howling and rain was pouring. Suddenly the lights went out and our protagonist found himself plunged into darkness. At first he didn't think much of it. It was just a power outage. He'd seen them before. They usually didn't last too long. So he decided to wait it out. He stood by the window watching the storm rage on outside. The thunder clapped and the lightning flashed. Then he saw something that made him freeze. Standing on the fire escape outside his window was a man. But how could he see him? It was pitch black outside. There wasn't a single streetlight working. The only illumination came from the flashes of lightning, which only lasted a fraction of a second, just enough time for our protagonist to see the man's face. It wasn't a friendly face either. The man's eyes glowed an eerie green in the darkness. They were wild and crazy, and they seemed to bore right through him. But then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man was gone. Our protagonist waited, hoping that the man would reappear, and when he did, he snapped a picture. But the image that captured wasn't clear. It was just a blurry mess. Disappointed, he threw his phone onto the couch and turned away. Then he heard a noise that made him turn back. A noise like someone had just stepped onto the carpet. He looked down and saw a pair of muddy footprints. They weren't there before. He was sure of that, so how did they get there? He followed the prints, which led directly to his closet. His closet, the one thing that he hadn't been able to see outside the window, was the blackout man hiding in there now? Is that even possible? He slowly approached the closet, and his hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. He pushed the door open, but there was nothing there. No one was hiding in the closet. He checked behind the clothes, under the shelves, and in the corners, but it was empty. Then he noticed something strange. The floor inside the closet was dry. There was no sign of mud or dirt, but the footprints on the carpet outside the closet were definitely muddy. How could this be? Did the man somehow create the illusion of footprints leading to the closet? Or was our protagonist losing his mind? As if to answer his question, another flash of lightning illuminated the closet. Our protagonist jumped, startled by what he saw. On the floor, right in the middle of the closet, was a single white shoe. It was sitting on the floor as if placed there intentionally. Our protagonist's heart was pounding. What did it mean? Who was this man? And why was he watching him? Was he dangerous? These questions raced through his mind. He wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but he couldn't. He was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The storm continued to rage outside, and the man in the closet seemed to be taunting him, daring him to come closer. But our protagonist never moved. He stood there frozen until the lights came back on. When they did, he cautiously approached the closet and opened the door. But the shoe was gone. The footprints were also vanished. It was as if the entire thing had been a figment of his imagination. But then he noticed something else. The closet was unlocked. It had been locked before, he was sure of it. He always kept his closet locked, but now the lock was broken and the door was unlocked. How did the man get in? More importantly, where did he go?
How?
Our protagonist never did find the answers to these questions. He called the police, but they found no evidence of a break-in. They also didn't find any signs of the man's presence. He was left with more questions than answers and a closet full of fears. As the days passed, the memory of the incident began to fade. But he never forgot the eerie green glow of the man's eyes or the sound of his heavy footsteps. And then one day, he was sorting through some old clothes in the back of his closet when he found something that made him jump. It was the shoe. It's the same white shoe that he had seen in the closet on that fateful night. But how did it get there? And where was the man? To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. Some say it was a hallucination brought on by the power outage and the storm. Others say it was a visit from beyond the grave. But one thing is certain, the man in the closet is not real. Our next Reddit post is from a user. This happened many years ago in rural Louisiana. I was visiting my grandmother who had recently passed away. It was summer and the funeral was held outside. The church was just a small building with a dirt floor and no air conditioning. So to keep the body from decomposing before burial, they kept it in the shade in a very ornate coffin. Back then, I knew very little about my extended family. My grandmother had been an only child. Her siblings had all passed away years before I was born, and most of the names of her relatives were lost to time. She often told me stories about her youth, though, and one particular name stuck out. One of her favorite stories was about her cousin, Clayton, who she hadn't seen in decades. He had a heart attack while running track at LSU and died at age 21. She always referred to him as the fastest man that ever lived. When I arrived at the funeral, I noticed there weren't many people there and none of them seemed to be related to my grandmother. I didn't think much of it at the time. Simply walked up to the coffin and stared at it for a while. Then I sat down on a nearby tree stump to wait for the service to begin. After about an hour, a woman approached me and introduced herself as a cousin of my grandmother. I knew right away she was unrelated by blood, because she didn't have any of the distinctive features that my grandmother and other relatives did. Still, she was nice enough, and I engaged in polite conversation with her until the handful of other mourners began to arrive. One by one, they all introduced themselves to me as well, but none of them looked or sounded anything like how my grandmother described her family. I remember thinking, are these people sure they're related to me? After all, this was a small town, and it was easy to see how some of the cousins and other relatives could have passed off as being related to someone else. Maybe they were. Still, something nagged at me during the funeral. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something was wrong. Afterwards, everyone filed past the coffin one last time, before it was lowered into the ground. I lagged behind so I could stare at the coffin for a few moments longer. That's when I saw it. The engraving on the side of the coffin read, "Clayton, you are the fastest man that ever lived." My grandmother's stories about her cousin had always taken place in the 1940s and 50s, and the name Clayton made it clear that this was not my grandmother's cousin. So whose funeral had I just attended? I don't know how long I stood there staring at the coffin, but eventually I had to move on. I drove back home feeling shaken. I told my mom about the funeral, and she said that it must have been some kind of mistake. We figured that maybe someone had stolen the coffin or something like that. Then 6 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. It was a white envelope addressed to me in handwriting that looked identical to the signature on the card we had received following my grandmother's death. Inside was an invitation to a memorial for me. I assumed they meant it figuratively, like they were holding a memorial service at church for me, but then I read the details. It was at the same cemetery where my grandmother was buried. It listed a date and time and said to please bring a casserole dish and your favorite memories of the deceased. The guest of honor was, of course, me. I called my mom and asked if she knew anything about this. She said, "What are you talking about?" Confused, I explained about the funeral I had attended and the invitation I had just received. My mom thought for a moment. "Oh, honey," she finally said, "that must have been your funeral they were having. You know, the one you didn't go to?" Yeah, now that I think about it, I don't really remember going to my own funeral. That was our weird funeral story. And now it's time to hear your story. Have you ever attended the wrong funeral? If so, tell us about it in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, if you haven't already, and subscribe for more content. It's me. And as always, don't forget to be kind to strangers, especially if they're ghosts. Welcome to my channel. Today's scary story is called The Sleepover Stranger. It was a dark and stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rattled the house. Inside, 4 friends were huddled around a sleeping bag fort, whispering and giggling. They had been telling each other scary stories all evening, but now they were getting too scared to continue. "I'm scared," whispered one of them, burying her face in the bag. "Let's just go to sleep." Another agreed. "Yeah, let's just forget about the spooky stories and try to get some sleep." But as their eyes drooped and they started to doze off, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Each of the 4 friends had brought a sleeping bag to the sleepover, and they had arranged them in a circle. Now, in the flickering light of the flashlight they had left on inside the tent, they could see the outlines of 5 sleeping bags. 5. How could there be 5 sleeping bags when only 4 of them had shown up for the sleepover? Had one of them brought an extra bag for a secret fort within a fort? They looked at one another, but nobody had brought an extra bag. They had only brought one each. As if to confirm this, the wind outside suddenly picked up, and with a mighty crash, a tree branch slammed against the window. They all screamed and huddled closer together. Whoever or whatever was out there didn't like them making noise, because the next sound to be heard was a loud bang on the front door, followed by heavy footsteps. Then silence. They held their breath, listening intently. Had it been a burglar? A crazed fan of their scary stories? Or something else entirely? Whatever it was, it seemed to have gone away, and relieved, they went back to trying to get some sleep. But then, a few minutes later, one of them felt something wet and cold seep into his sleeping bag. At first, he thought it must be rainwater that had leaked in through the roof of the fort. But then he felt again, and realized it wasn't water. It was a hand. A cold, dead hand that felt like ice. He screamed and scrambled back, knocking over his sleeping bag and sending the others tumbling out of their forts in a panic. They all stared at the sleeping bag, their flashlight beams sweeping back and forth across its surface. Then slowly, ever so slowly, one of the girls reached out and touched the sleeping bag. She screamed and jerked her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. The skin on her fingertips was already red and blistering. She cried out, dropping to her knees and clasping her hands over her mouth, as if to keep herself from screaming again. They all huddled together in a terrified group, their flashlight illuminating the panicked expressions on their tearful faces. None of them dared touch the sleeping bag, but one of the boys, summoning a bravery he didn't feel, crept closer and poked it cautiously with a finger. At first, nothing happened. Then the sleeping bag began to move. It rippled like water when a stone is tossed into it, and then a hand shot out, grabbing the boy's finger and digging its icy fingers into it. He screamed and scrambled back, tripping over his sleeping bag and landing hard on the floor. The others screamed and scattered, running away from the fort as fast as their legs could carry them. They ran until they reached the front door, where they burst out into the storm and didn't stop running until they were far away from the house and the creepy sleeping bag. When they finally got back to the house, they told their parents what had happened, but their parents just laughed and said it was all a dream. And as the days passed and no one else came forward with similar stories, they began to think maybe it had been a dream after all. It is until one day when they were looking through old photos and came across a picture of them at their sleepover. In the picture, they could see the outlines of the sleeping bags, and in the center of the circle was a fifth sleeping bag that none of them recognized. They all stared at the photo, their eyes wide with renewed terror as they remembered the icy hand and the burning pain in their friends' fingertips. Could there really have been someone else in the house with them that night? Someone who had snuck into their fort and tried to grab one of them while they were sleeping. But if so, where was he now? And what had he been trying to do? They never found out, because the person who had taken the picture quickly shut down the line of questioning, insisting that they had imagined it. But as they grew older and moved away from their hometown, they never forgot that sleepover and the terrifying stranger who had crashed their party. If you want to hear more scary stories, stay tuned. Welcome to my channel. Today we will be telling you about the nurse's last patient. A nurse from Chicago was left terrified after she wheeled one of her patients to the elevator, and she turned around for a second, and the bed was empty. It turns out that the patient hadn't checked in for 30 years. The nurse worked at the hospital for more than 30 years before she retired. During that time, she had dealt with countless patients. One patient in particular stood out to her. It all happened one ordinary day at work. She had been working there for so long that nothing really fazed her anymore. She had seen it all, from happy patients being discharged to critically ill patients passing away. This made her a strong and empathetic nurse who was well respected by her colleagues and the patients. On this day, she was assigned to take care of an elderly woman who had been admitted to the hospital for a routine checkup. As the nurse made her rounds, she chatted with the woman about her family and how she was feeling. The patient seemed to be in good spirits, and the nurse could tell that she was going to make a full recovery. After the checkup, the nurse had to wheel the patient to the elevator. It was a long walk from the examination room to the elevator, and the patient was too weak to do it herself. As they walked, the two of them continued to chat, and the nurse made sure to make the patient comfortable. When they got to the elevator, the nurse stopped for a moment to catch her breath. She looked down at the patient and asked her if she needed anything else. The patient shook her head and the nurse smiled. She knew that this was going to be the last time that she would see this patient. And as she wheeled her into the elevator, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that she had done everything she could to make sure that her patient was taken care of. As the elevator doors closed, the nurse felt a sudden chill down her spine. She turned around to check on her patient, but she was shocked to find that the bed was empty. She looked down at the chart in her hand and saw that the patient's name was Mary Smith. She checked the hospital's computer system, found that there was no record of a Mary Smith being admitted to the hospital, let alone being in that particular room. She immediately called security and explained what had happened. They searched the hospital, but they couldn't find the patient anywhere. The nurse was scared and confused. She had just seen the patient, and now she was gone without a trace. In the end, the nurse decided to investigate on her own. She went back to the room where she had seen the patient and started looking for clues. She found a piece of paper under the bed that had the patient's name and address on it. She took the paper to the hospital's admitting office and found out that the patient had actually checked in 30 years ago. But somehow she had been discharged without ever being seen by a doctor. The nurse was horrified. She couldn't believe that someone could go missing in plain sight. She contacted the police and told them what she had found. They were able to track down the patient's son, who was living in another state. He had no idea that his mother had been missing for so long. The nurse felt like she had played a part in reuniting the family and bringing a missing persons case to a close after 30 years. Even though the experience had been scary, she knew that it was all worth it. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends and family. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Our next Reddit post is from a user. I moved into a new house in Ohio, and in the attic I found a family photo album. Every single page ends with a picture of someone sitting in the very room I'm standing in. I should provide some context. This house was built in 1908, and it has been in the same family until my family bought it. The first owner sold it to his son when he got too old to take care of it, and that son sold it to his son when he got too old to take care of it. And this continued on until my family bought it. So the people in the photos are most likely ancestors of mine who used to live here. Here's a picture of the room. As you can see, it's just an attic storage room with a skylight. Nothing really particularly special or unique about it, except for the fact that it was clearly a place where my ancestors liked to sit and have their pictures taken. Here's the first photo I found. It looks like a young girl in a nightgown. Judging by the style of the dress, I'd say she was probably born around 1890. And if we look closely at the wall behind her, we can see that there is writing there. It appears to be crayon writing. If I could just get a bit closer. There we go. She wrote, Clara, June 1898. So we know the name of the little girl and the year that the picture was taken. But what I find interesting is that she spelled out the month. Why did she spell out the month? Why not just write June? Was June a particularly special month for this little girl? Maybe her birthday was in June? Or maybe she had a really good friend named June? Here's another picture. This time it looks like two boys, one sitting and one standing. We can make out the writing on the wall a bit easier this time. It says Walter 1902 and Earl 1904, so these must be brothers, Walter and Earl. I wonder if they were twins. No, because if we look at the back of the photograph, there's writing there too. It says, back row, Walter, front row, Earl. So we know that the boy in the front was Earl, and the boy in the back was Walter. Here's another one. This time it's a girl in a Victorian nightgown. I love the lace on these nightgowns. It looks so pretty. But what I find interesting is that the way that she's sitting down is the exact same way that the girl in the first photo sat. Same pose. And the girl in this photo is also sitting right under the writing from the previous photo. Did she do that on purpose? Was she trying to spell out her name? Let's take a closer look. Yes, it looks like she did. This is Ada. And if we flip the photo over, there's writing on the back. It says ADA, 1906. And finally, here's the last photo that I found. It looks like a married couple. They seem to be in their late teens or early 20s. And if we look at the wall, I don't see any writing. But if we tilt our heads to the side, we can see something. It looks like the faint outline of the writing from the previous photos. But is that really the case? Or is it just the light reflecting off the wall at a particular angle? I think the photos are just playing tricks on us. I don't think there's any writing on this wall. So who were these people? What were their lives like? Sadly, we'll never know. But I feel like they were very lucky to have left behind such a detailed account of their lives. Just imagine how cool it will be when I have kids, and I can show them these photos and tell them, hey, those are your ancestors. Their lives may have been very different than ours, but in the end, they were just regular people trying to live their lives and make the best of the world they were in. Just like us. And those are the stories behind these photos. Do you have any old photos lying around your house? Maybe you should dig through your attic or your basement? You never know what kind of treasures you might find. I love that story. Those poor kids. Hope they were at least related. That would be super awkward if they were unrelated. And they all kept getting together just to take these weird group photos. Speaking of creepy, check out this story. Hi, OP. Why does the girl in the last photo look like she's trying to escape from the clutches of the devil himself? Also, why is the guy holding her like that? Is he supposed to be her dad or something? Yeah, I agree. That is a very strange photo. Almost looks like he's trying to force her head towards him. Like, imagine if someone walked in on that. Imagine if the person taking the photo walked in on that. Also, why are they all sitting in an attic? I mean, sure, maybe they wanted natural lighting for their photos, but still, it's an attic. Who hangs out in attics? Yeah, I don't know. Guess people did stuff back then that we wouldn't think of doing now. Like, what if they were expecting an air raid or something? Like, is that why they're all hiding in this attic? They're like, get down, everybody. The air raid's coming. Then once the air raid is over, they're just like, okay, let's take a family photo while we're down here. That's a good point. But if that was the case, then shouldn't they have been wearing clothes? Because if an air raid was happening, then wouldn't everyone have been wearing clothes? Well, maybe they took the photos before they got dressed. Or after they took the photos before they got dressed. But then the writing on the wall doesn't make sense. Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe they were just weirdos. If you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also hit that subscribe button because I put out new videos every single day. There's nothing worse than finding a hidden camera in your own home. Imagine going to sleep in your own bed and not knowing that there is a complete stranger watching you. Well, that's exactly what happened to a student in California who found a hidden camera in the vent above her bed. The footage from the camera showed a man entering the room every night and standing over her for hours. Hi, I'm your host, and this is 5 Scary Campuses. Before we get started, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out a lot. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube Shorts, then please go watch the full video on our channel. We release weekly videos there every Friday. Our story today comes from San Diego State University in San Diego, California. In 2016, a student named Chelsea just moved into her dorm room. She was excited to start her freshman year at SDSU and make new friends. However, she soon noticed that her new dorm room had a weird smell to it, and she couldn't figure out what it was. There was also a strange air vent in the middle of the ceiling that didn't seem to lead anywhere. A few weeks after school started, Chelsea came home from class and noticed a small hole in the wall next to her bed. At first she thought it was just a storage space, but when she reached inside she felt something strange. She pulled out a hidden camera that was disguised to look like a smoke detector. When she checked the camera, she found that it was recording and had been recording for months. Chelsea immediately called campus police, and they ended up finding 14 other hidden cameras in other students' rooms. They were all disguised as everyday objects like smoke detectors, clocks, and even inside of teddy bears. A man had been secretly spying on students in their dorm rooms for months. Police ended up identifying the man as 48-year-old David DeRosia, a local handyman who worked at the university. He had installed the camera sometime between June and September. David had been living in a hotel near the campus and had been spying on the same group of students. All of the rooms that he targeted were occupied by young women. But why was he spying on them? Is he just a pervert, or was he planning something more sinister? Thankfully, none of the students had been harmed. However, police did find over 3,000 images of women on his computer that he had taken from the hidden cameras. Some of the images were of students who attended the university, but others appeared to be random people that he had taken pictures of without their knowledge. David was arrested and charged with 26 felony counts of stalking, 20 counts of unauthorized possession of a camera, and 18 counts of attempted burglary. Police believe that he may have been planning to use the images to blackmail some of the students. He was later sentenced to 4 years in prison. But what about those poor students? How could they ever feel safe again knowing that their privacy had been invaded in such a personal way? And how could they trust that the university would take the necessary steps to ensure that something like this would never happen again? In an effort to prevent future incidents, the university took several precautions. They sent out an alert to all students informing them of the situation and encouraging them to report any suspicious activity. They also provided resources for counseling and support for those affected by the incident. Additionally, the university conducted an investigation to determine if any staff or faculty were involved in the incident and took disciplinary action against anyone found responsible. They also implemented stricter policies regarding the installation of cameras on campus and provided clear guidelines on when and where cameras can be used. Furthermore, the university increased security patrols in and around the dormitories to ensure the safety and privacy of students. Finally, the university encouraged students to get involved in self-defense classes and other safety initiatives to help them feel more empowered and less vulnerable. Hopefully these measures helped the students feel safer. But what do you think? How would you react if you found a hidden camera in your dorm room? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, then you'll love this series. Every week we bring you the most terrifying stories from all over the world. New episodes are released every Friday, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Also, if you want more 5 Scary Campuses, then check out our podcast. We've got over 100 episodes ready to binge. Just search for 5 Scary Campuses wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for watching. I've been your host. Be sure to check back for new episodes every Friday. And remember, don't click this link if you don't want to be scared. Hello, friends. Welcome to my channel. If you want to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe. The man moved into a new house in Ohio. The owners of the house were an elderly married couple who had lived there for over 50 years. But now they had to move into a nursing home due to health problems. The man bought the house for a very low price, but he had to renovate it because it had been empty for several decades. He spent a lot of time and money, But eventually everything was ready, and he moved into his new home. One day while cleaning up the attic, the man found a big family photo album. It was filled with pictures of some family. The man looked at these people as if they were strangers. He didn't recognize any of them. Then he turned the page and saw a photo of a man and a woman standing in the same room that he was in. It's only the furniture was different. They were standing right where the man was standing. But that wasn't the creepiest part. Every next page had a picture of a person sitting in the very same place. Some were lying on the floor, others were sitting on the man's chair, and still others were sitting on the floor as if waiting for something. All of them were staring directly at the camera. The man was shocked. Who were these people? Why did they take pictures in this very room? And most importantly, why were they watching him? The man tried to shake off these unpleasant thoughts and went about his business. He decided to deal with the pictures later. A few days passed, and the man kept having creepy feelings. Got to the point where he couldn't even eat or sleep well. So he called the local historical society to find out who lived in the house before him. An old woman picked up the phone. She introduced herself as the daughter of the family from the pictures. The woman said she remembered her parents and other family members often visiting this room. It was their favorite place to spend time together. As for the pictures, they were taken on the day the family gathered for a picnic in the yard. Each family member took their turn sitting on the porch swing. Everyone was happy back then, the woman said, and asked if the man could send her the pictures. The man agreed and sent all the photos to the woman. Then he waited. A few days passed, but he received no reply. Probably she was busy, the man thought. But then a month passed, 2 months, and still there was no reply. The man began to worry. What if something happened to the woman? He decided to pay her a visit. He drove to the address she had given him. It was an ordinary house with a neat lawn and a well-groomed garden. The man knocked on the door. A surprised woman opened it. She was the same woman from the phone call. Looking at the man, she immediately burst into tears and asked him to come inside. When the man entered the house, he saw a pile of pictures on the table. They were the ones he had sent to the woman. But that wasn't the creepiest part. There were also pictures from the very same album that he had found in the attic. The woman explained that she had called every single person from the pictures, but only a few had survived. Most of them had already passed away. So when she learned that the new owner of the house had found their family album, she hoped to get it back. However, not all the pictures were accounted for. The woman showed the man the pictures she had received from him and added, "I don't understand. You see, my mother is in all the pictures except this one. We don't know what happened to her. Maybe you have a picture of her among those you found in the attic. Please take a look." The man felt sorry for the woman and promised to help her find her mother's picture. When he returned home, he immediately went into the attic. To his great surprise, he found another album just like the first one. The pages were filled with pictures of the same family. But unlike the first album, this one contained a picture of a young woman. The man immediately recognized her. That was the woman from the other album. She was standing next to her husband and other family members. The man took the photo out of the album and examined it closely. On the back, he found the date and the name of the photographer. He took the photo to the store and asked them to develop the negative. It turned out that the picture was taken on the day the family gathered for a picnic. But there was one detail that no one had noticed before. The woman was holding an empty frame. Clearly she wanted to be in the family picture, but for some reason, she wasn't in it. The man called the woman and told her about his discovery. She was overjoyed. Finally, after all these years, she would be able to see a picture of her mother. Friends, what would you do if you found a photo album with creepy pictures in your new house? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And that's all for today. Like the video and share it with your friends. See you soon. Bye.